Happy Monday. Good morning and welcome to your early morning intuitive guidance. I'm Dr. Bonnie Nussbaum. We have a little dusting of snow today. Not much that's sticking to the sidewalks, but the grass and the rooftops are covered. So we're back to winter. I had to dig out my winter coat and the gloves and all that other happy stuff. So those of you who put away your snow blowers, this is all your fault. Anywho, good morning, Carolyn. Welcome. Glad you're here. Happy Monday. We are back to our book, Taking the War Out of Our Words, The Art of Powerful Non-Defensive Communication by Sharon Ellison. Good morning to whomever else has popped on. Glad you are here. Welcome, welcome. We'll give it a minute or two for everyone to start popping on because we've got a little bit of a... We got the second half of chapter 11, or part of chapter 11. Good morning, Gwen. Glad you're here. Good morning, Cindy. Welcome. Hello, hello. Thank you for the pretty rainbow hearts, Carolyn. Much appreciated. So we're working on chapter 11, which is formats for making non-defensive predictions. And I'm going to review just a little smidgen of that. And then we're going to jump into today's part, which is actually about selecting consequences. If you're going to make a prediction, if you do A, I will do B. Yep, snow here too. Not much. I'm thinking it'll melt, but we'll see. I think it's not supposed to get very warm today, so maybe it will hang around a day or two. But yeah, good thing we didn't put away the shovels. But then we'll jump into the part about actually selecting the consequences. How do you do this? Because as a psychologist, I've had opportunity to laugh with parents about the selections they've made. Good morning, Peggy. Glad you are here. Especially when we make a consequence, a prediction in the moment when we're heated, we often pick very poorly. We often pick consequences that impact us negatively again. So we want to be planful and thoughtful and in as much control of our emotions as possible when we make the selection of the specific consequences we're going to dole out. Okay, so let's get started with this. So it's chapter 11. If you're following along in the book, it's page 186. I'm just going to do a little review here, and then I'm going to jump ahead to the page that we're actually going to be on, which is 191. So chapter 11 is formats for making non-defensive predictions. And the part we talked about last time was determining what the problem was, okay? So there were three things. Determine the specific parts of an interaction that are causing a problem. For instance, if your kid is saying to you, I'm not going to do the chores, I hate you, blah, blah, blah. What's the issue there? For some people, for some parents, it's going to be the sassy attitude. For other parents, it's going to be the lack of completing the chores. And for still other parents, it's going to be both of those factors. So we need to know what it is about the interaction that's causing us the most problem. Based on that, decide what you need to change in order to meet your needs in that situation. So is it, I need my kid to do the chores? Is it, I need my kid to treat me respectfully? Is it both of those things? And for different parents, it's going to be different choices. Consider how this incident fits into the reoccurring pattern to figure out how your prediction may influence the overall relationship. That's kind of the win the battle but lose the war thing. If you pick a specific consequence that addresses let's say just in that example, addresses the sassy attitude, but you really wanted to take care of getting those chores done, you've kind of shot yourself in the foot there. So again, being thoughtful and planful about this stuff is really important. All right. Good morning, Linda. Glad you are here. Welcome. We are doing Taking the War Out of Our Words, and we're on chapter 11, and now we're going to talk about selecting consequences. If we're going to hand somebody a prediction of what we're going to do given what they are doing, we want to pick out those consequences very carefully. And she's got some points here that I think help guide us to make good selections. So It's called selecting consequences. The next step is to identify the behavior to which we want to respond differently and select the consequences we will apply. So she gives a couple of the examples from previous stories she's talked about. Good morning, Susan. Glad you're here. I want to change how I respond to my partner's unsolicited directions when I drive. Remember that little vignette that the man was backseat driving as the woman was driving. Or I want to change how I respond to unsolicited advice from my coworker on how to perform office procedures. So in that case, it was someone telling this woman how she ought to be doing her job. So we may create one consequence or several. Our consequences do not have to be focused on behavior or material reward. We may predict our own reactions that we will have when someone else's choice is made in terms of what we will do, feel, think, or believe. Remember way back when in the book we had that verb, V-E-R-B, and it was about what we will do, what we will think, what we will believe, what we will feel. So we'll get some examples here, and I think that will help. In the backseat driving scenario, you might first predict a behavior. If you tell me what road to take when I haven't asked for advice, then I will simply not answer you and continue on the route I had planned. Okay, so very clearly stating out what's going to happen if he continues to backseat drive. Here you predict two behaviors, your subsequent silence and your choice to stick to the route you have selected. You could also make predictions about how you will feel, what you will believe, and what you will think. If you continue to give me orders when I'm driving, then I will feel angry. I will believe that you are intent on dominating how I drive, and I will think you are so focused on doing things your own way that even my choosing the route makes you feel a loss of control. So there she's predicting three things about what she's going to think, how she's going to feel, etc. All right? Although most of us would rarely use all four predictions together, predicting various kinds of behavioral and non-behavioral reactions can be very effective. And one of the things she's going to talk about shortly is keep those consequences as small as possible, enough to get the job done, but not anymore. Good morning, Beth. Welcome, welcome. Glad you are here. We are doing selecting consequences today. When someone is showing us negative behavior, etc., how do we pick out the consequences we want to predict for them? So when we do the behavioral and non-behavioral reactions, it creates a complete picture of how you will react to your partner's orders and provides clear information regarding the consequences. Just as a position statement puts information into the feedback loop, so do these predictions. So remember Doug and Virginia? Virginia was the one who kept interrupting Doug as he was trying to talk, and so he was predicting that he was going to stop talking whenever she interrupted. When Doug predicts that he will feel invisible if Virginia doesn't listen to him more carefully, he is predicting an involuntary emotion. If he if he conveys through his tone and body language that his goal is to make her feel guilty and change her behavior, he is using his prediction to punish her. Because such guilt trips are offered and received as criticism, they rarely cause the guilty party to change behaviors. How many of us do this stuff though, right? So this is about us becoming conscious of how we're delivering this consequence. Good morning, Judy. Welcome, welcome. So that it's most likely to be effective, so that it doesn't add fuel to the fire of our disagreement, all right? On the other hand, if Doug truthfully reveals his reaction so that Virginia can better understand the consequences of her behavior, his predictions are neither punishing nor controlling, all right? So basically the gist, and this goes against how most of us have been raised and taught, is not to manipulate the other person's behavior. It's to let them know they get to choose. They are 100% in control of their own choices, but we are in control of how we're going to respond to that. And we want to lay it out as clearly as possible so they can make a good choice. All right? So here's how we go about evaluating the selected consequences. Once we have thought about a consequence we want to articulate, we can evaluate it according to the following 4 standards for an effective prediction. And I thought these 4 standards were very helpful. Cindy, if you'd like to add them into the feed, fabulous. If not, I'll take care of it after the fact. But the first one is what I just mentioned. Select as small a consequence as possible to meet your need. And one of the reasons for this is you don't want to be punishing yourself here. So that's like saying to your kid, if you can't behave, we're not going to someplace you want to go. You're punishing yourself. Do you really want to do that? So, having made an initial selection of the consequences, you can ask yourself, is this the smallest consequence available that addresses the problem I want to solve? So we're selecting as small a consequence as possible to meet our need. Small consequences can create positive change more effectively than large ones. Think about that. That kind of runs counterintuitive, doesn't it? We figure we have to pull out the big guns in order to get someone's behavior to change. Not so much. Let's hear some more. If your supervisor told you at 4 p.m. that you have to finish typing a document before 5 p.m. or else it will show up on your performance review, you would probably feel pressured and be likely to make errors. If you were told to type the document by 5 p.m. or else stay until you finished, you would probably feel less pressure, make fewer errors, and still be motivated to finish as quickly as possible. And feel less manipulated, right? If your boss says, we need this finished today, you'll have to stay until it's done. Does that feel less manipulative than, we need this finished today or I'm going to put it on your performance review? So then we have Marcus and Sally. Remember them? Marcus is the one who'd get, glowery, not talk about whatever's bothering him, and then Sally would be flipping all over the place trying to get him to talk. When Marcus wouldn't talk to Sally about what was bothering him, she sometimes threatened to end the relationship. If you can't talk to me when you are upset, we might as well not even stay married. That's pulling out some pretty big guns, isn't it? Uncounted threats of rejection have been tossed out by people trying to persuade someone to talk, have sex, buy a certain house, agree to a vacation, or stop watching football. When Sally asked herself what she needed most when Marcus was brooding, she realized it was to not be affected herself when his glowering energy filled the room. To this end, along with predicting that she would not try to convince him to talk, she sometimes also predicted, if you don't want to talk, then I will go in the other room and do something else. If you change your mind or get in a better mood later, I'd like to spend time with you. So she's not threatening to end the marriage, which is, a 10 response to him being mutzy. Now she's giving like a 5 response. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to a different room. I don't want to be in this energy. I'm going to go to a different room, do something else. When you're ready to talk, come and find me, kind of a deal. If we are in a power struggle, we often predict consequences that exceed what we need to protect ourselves. Makes sense, doesn't it? Is this chiming for some of you? If you don't stop bossing me when I drive, I'm never going anywhere with you again. One that I doled out at one point, and I stuck with it. I mean, you have to stick with it. It's not fun, was, if you go behind my back at 16 and get your belly button pierced, when I've told you you've got enough holes in you now, wait until you're 18, you can punch as many holes in yourself as you want. If you go behind my back and get your belly button pierced, you don't get the car for the summer. She went ahead and did it and didn't get the car for the summer. But that also led to some consequences for me. I then had to take her places, or her brother did, or whatever. But you want to be careful about what consequences you dole out, because A, you must stick with them, all right? And B, are you punishing yourself, okay? Let's see. By selecting the smallest consequence necessary, simply driving the route we want to go and not arguing about it, we are much more likely to follow through on our prediction than if we threaten to take separate cars forever after. So that's the first one, selecting as small a consequence as possible to meet your need. Thank you, Cindy, for putting that in the feed. Here's number 2. Create a consequence that is self-contained. Create a consequence that is self-contained. It is important not to add consequences later that we do not specify originally. Okay? You can ask yourself, is this consequence I'm predicting the only one I'm going to implement? Or will I have other reactions that I haven't clearly predicted? So for example, remember we had Renee and Jamal. They were the ones who were doing the house renovation, and they were both exhausted, but he wanted to get the cleanup done before taking a break. She wanted to take a break before getting the cleanup done. Both are valid, but obviously they're not going to work together very well. For example, Renee might have said to Jamal while cleaning up the remodeling debris, "If you are not willing to talk about how to get a break sometime this weekend, then I will plan to take one for myself and let you know what my plan is. If you are willing to talk about it, then I would love to plan some kind of relaxation with you." If Jamal refuses to discuss the issue, the only consequence Renee can implement non-defensively is to make her own plan and inform him of it. If she argues, sulks, or slams things around as she's cleaning up, she multiplies the consequences and implements ones she did not predict. Okay? So again, neutrality is key here. We don't still get to be pissy about what we've selected as consequences. All right? We merely follow through. Jamal also could predict, if you're not willing to create a specific plan for getting this mess cleaned up before Monday morning, then I'm not going to talk about taking a break this weekend. If you're willing to create a plan for the cleanup, then I'd feel great about figuring out how to get some relaxation time. If Renee doesn't make a cleanup plan, Jamal will not react with irritation. He simply won't discuss getting some time off. Likewise, if you predict how you will respond to your child's lack of appreciation, I gave my kid a bicycle for her birthday and she's instantly complaining about the seat and wants a different seat. Your stated consequence should be the only consequence. If you don't state it on the front end, it doesn't get added in later. If you do not show appreciation for the bicycle I bought for you and stop demanding a new seat for it, then I will ask for it back until such time as you can appreciate it. If you do show appreciation and don't make demands about upgrading it immediately, then I would love for you to keep it. Once in a while, someone is appalled that I would advocate taking back a gift, even an unappreciated one. I think taking back an unappreciated gift is very different from giving a gift with strings attached, where we expect some favor in return from the other person. A person who does not appreciate a gift has not really received it. Unless what we do is appreciated, the person is unlikely to feel nurtured by it. Thus, when we allow gifts to be received without appreciation, we actually contribute to the person's feeling of lack of nurturing. This is one reason why making predictions that focus on respect and reciprocity are so important. If we do not set such limits, we not only fail to protect ourselves from abuse, we also fail to nurture others. Kind of an interesting concept, isn't it? While we might hesitate to take back an unappreciated gift, most of us would not hesitate to implement unpredicted consequences or implement them with a negative attitude. This, I think, truly is damaging. Suppose that after taking your demanding child's bike away, you continue to be angry and cancel a fishing trip or shopping trip together. No longer self-contained with absolute boundaries, your consequence has now spread into other areas and its ramifications have multiplied. If you know you, 1, will be angry, and 2, will not want to go fishing with your child, you need to predict those 2 consequences in addition to taking back the bike. When we add extra consequences without warning, we become punitive and controlling. If you only predict taking the bike until the child can appreciate it, you would remain in a good mood and enjoy the fishing trip. If you do have an unexpected reaction to what someone does, I think it is important to discuss it and make careful adjustments. As much as possible, however, what we predict should constitute the sum total of our subsequent reactions to the person's choice. This is why we want to think it out on the front end before we start knee-jerk reacting and handing out consequences, right? Think it through. Number 3, when possible, give the other person control over the duration of any consequence. Now this one, I can already feel people chafing at this one because we're so used to being punishing. We're so used to having war in our words. We're so used to one-upping, providing or applying pressure, etc. This is a change. So know that as I read this section, you might be thinking, yeah, but keep breathing. Try this. See what happens, okay? Indulge me a little here. So number 3, when possible, give the other person control over the duration of any consequence. The question to ask yourself here might be, does my prediction give as much control to the other person as possible while still protecting me? Thank you, Cindy. As Corey began to make predictions that emphasized reciprocity, she consistently refused to give Beth, her daughter, permission to go out with friends until her jobs and homework were done. Compare the difference in the following 2 predictions. So here's 2 different ways. If you don't get the dishes done by 7, then you can't go to the party. Or, if you don't get the dishes done by 7, then you may not leave for the party until you finish them. Again, what's the smallest consequence that's likely to get the job taken care of? And there are those kids who are just kind of, and so they're going to push the limits, they're going to push the boundaries. In the first case, Corey would have predicted an irrevocable and thus more punishing consequence. If you don't have it done by 7, you aren't going to the party. In the second case, she made a prediction that gave Beth power to control whether or not the consequence was implemented and also how long it was in force. Beth might now test the limits. She might not finish the dishes by 7 to see if Corey meant business, but then finish them by 7:15 so she could still head off to the party. Not only is determining the duration of an unpleasant consequence empowering, it also decreases the likelihood of an ongoing power struggle. In that case, in that particular case, good morning, Danielle, glad you are here. In that particular case, yes, Corey or Beth might push the limits. If you can suck it up for a round or 2, pretty soon she's not going to bother to push the limits because she knows what's going to happen. If I wait till 7:15, I don't get to go to the party till 7:15. If I wait till 9 o'clock, I don't get to go to the party till 9 o'clock. Geez, my curfew's 10. Do I want to go to the party for only an hour? And she begins to make healthier choices. All right? She may not. She may decide she's just going to pout all night. That is her choice. You've then made your prediction of what you are going to do, okay? I want to note clearly here that there are some cases where we are wise to impose a condition that is neither small nor reversible, such as when we end a relationship that has become progressively abusive. Done is done. There are certain lines that we don't allow to be crossed. And then you put your foot down, you apply the consequences, and done is done. But for the most part, for most things where we have difficulties in interactions with people, we can do these 4 steps. That was number 3. When possible, give the other person control over the duration of any consequence. So here's number 4. Consider the range of effects any consequence will have. Again, we really want to think this through consciously, and we want to make the best prediction for ourselves and for the other person, okay? At the beginning of the chapter, she outlined many of the possible consequences Sandra might experience depending on how Jake responded to her decision to not take care of his banking problems. Remember, this is a married couple. He runs a construction business. She does his books. He writes checks and doesn't tell her about it. He leaves checks laying all over the place, blah, blah, blah. So she is the one who then gets the collection calls and has to deal with the bank and all the negative stuff. She wants to stop that. It creates too much stress in her life. So here's where we go with that. So she's listed all the potential things that she could do. Good morning, CJ, welcome. She's listed all the potential things that she could do. She could refuse to do his banking completely. She could continue to do the banking the way she has been with him and experiencing the negative consequences. She could choose to only do certain parts of it, like I'll do the data entry, etc., but you're going to have to field the calls from the bank. There were a lot of different consequences or approaches she had laid out, right? While such a list can be intimidating, I think it is important to think through the possible consequences of any prediction before we make it. If Sandra can't live with the consequences of her prediction, she needs to find a different one that works better for her. Sandra might say, if you are willing to do certain things, such as giving me the checkbook each evening along with a record of the day's deposits so I can register the checks and advise you about the status of your account, then I will take care of the finances. If not, then I would prefer you hire someone else to take care of the deposits and any bounced checks so it doesn't interfere with our marriage. If you do hire someone else to deal with the deposits and bounced checks, then I would still be happy to take care of the rest of the business finances, such as the payroll and taxes. So again, she's laying out various options here. Anytime we decide we can't live with the possible ramifications of a prediction we are thinking of making, we can pick a different prediction and consequence. And that's important, okay? We've got to be able to live with this. Again, if I tell my kid, if you can't behave, you're going to have to stay in the house all weekend long. I have now just punished myself having to stay in the house all weekend long. Is that really what I want to do? When we consider ramifications for a consequence, we can ask ourselves questions like the following. Am I willing to follow through on this consequence? If you are not willing to follow through on it, all it is a threat. And the other person is likely going to be willing to take the bait and test you and see if you follow through or not. All right? And if you do not follow through, you have really just shot yourself in the foot, okay? Because they're going to keep testing, because even if it's a very lean schedule of reinforcement, kids in particular, if 1 out of 10 times you follow through on your consequences, they're going to be willing to take that bet. If 9 out of 10 times they're going to get away with it, that was one thing when I was working with parents and kids that I always said to them, do not make a prediction if you are not willing to follow through on it. Pick something you absolutely are willing to follow through on. Do not pick something you will not follow through on. They will test you. They will win. Okay? So am I willing to follow through on this consequence? Is there anything that might prevent me from following through? So if I say if you don't do this, you're staying in the house all weekend, but I know that I have a gig set up for Saturday afternoon with my friends, I can't be there to make sure that that kid's going to be staying in the house. And then again, do I have to cancel my gig to make this thing happen? Or do I go to my gig and I've given the kid carte blanche to leave the house? Yeah, that's not a good setup. Am I only protecting myself and maintaining reciprocity, or am I trying to control the other person? And again, we have been so heavily trained to try to control the other person that we really need to ask ourselves that question and only answer. If we're manipulating to get a certain result, not good. Take a step back, reconsider. Can I live with the possible choices the other person might make in response to this prediction? So, for instance, if I tell my kid, I expect you to mow the lawn before you go do X, have I done it, or do I need to, if my kid's a manipulative kid and they weave through the lawn and they, do a terrible job, what do? Am I going to, on the front end, I would prefer, I need you to mow the lawn to my satisfaction before you go to Johnny's house. So they then know they can't get away with making a mess out of the lawn and thinking they're going to leave. All right? We are typically fearful about making predictions that can result in some sort of a loss. Yet we sometimes fail to realize that, whether we consciously determine boundaries or create them by default, we are always experiencing their consequences. So when we set something up like that, especially if it's out of anger, we experience those consequences also. We need to be aware of that. Many of these default boundaries result in far more damaging consequences than those we consciously establish in order to create reciprocity. So here's an example of that. Sandra was already on the edge of wanting a divorce because of the effects of Jake's financial problems on her home life. Had she chosen not to risk making the prediction, either you give me all of the receipts at the end of the day or I'm not doing the books, her relationship with Jake may well have deteriorated beyond repair. It could have cost them their marriage. So it was well worth laying out the prediction and the consequences because it was already headed for divorce court anyway. So characteristics of an effective prediction, just reviewing. The consequences are as small as possible to accomplish the goal. The other person has as much opportunity as possible to control the duration of any negative consequences. So we're not predicting you're going to be, punished for a year. Who are you punishing, right? The consequences are self-contained. We don't keep adding consequences to it after we've made the initial prediction. The prediction has no foreseeable ramifications we cannot tolerate. Selecting a possible prediction and then evaluating it according to these standards can help prevent you from making predictions that fall apart midstream or create outcomes you can't live with. After conceiving of some predictions and reviewing these guidelines, you can make your selection final, and at that point, that's when you share it with the other person. As we gain more skill, this process becomes increasingly automatic. In many situations, you will be able to create predictions in the moment. You might automatically say to your child, if you speak in a demanding tone, I won't answer you. If you speak respectfully, I will. The same prediction works well with adults. So I think that's a pretty useful section of the book. If we do nothing else out of this book, but this particular little thing that we went over today, we're going to be head and shoulders ahead of the game, right? So I'd like you practicing. I'd like you practicing choosing consequences, thinking them through according to the 4 questions, determining, is this an appropriate consequence I would then like to predict? Again, we tend to get blinders on. This is the only answer there is to... No. There's always multiple potential consequences we could predict. Again, if you can step back, if you can take a breath, if you can buy yourself some time, if you can think it through, am I really going to want to mete out these consequences? Am I willing to bear the cost of these consequences? It can be very helpful in terms of making a smaller consequence your choice and not incurring a bunch of problems for yourself or creating more conflict with the other person. When you, again, the smallest consequence that gets the job done is the one to pick. All right? So have some fun with this in a way. Think back to some old conflicts and how you chose to hand out a consequence and what you might have been able to do differently. It can be really helpful to rethink them. Good morning, Leah. Glad you are here. Welcome, welcome. We're just about done, but I'll post the video right away so people can go back and rewatch it. This is a lot of information, and it also runs counterintuitive to what we've been trained to do. So we want to go back and review and practice and think through old situations, how we could have done things differently that might have led to better outcomes, etc. Have an awesome Monday. We'll see you again tomorrow. Remember, you're capable of far more than you think you are. Bye-bye.